Hi, I'm Sarah. And last Saturday night, my own sister stood up at our family dinner table and told everyone assembled that I was a disappointment to the Chen family name. Not because I'd committed some terrible crime or made destructive life choices, but because I earned $11.50 an hour serving cappuccinos and croissants at a neighborhood café while she pulled down a six-figure salary as a marketing executive. She actually looked our parents in the eye and suggested they should stop mentioning me when their friends asked about their daughters' careers. What she had absolutely no way of knowing was that come Monday morning at 9 sharp, I'd be walking through the glass doors of her precious marketing firm not to visit, not to apply for a position, but to take my place behind the mahogany desk of the corner office as her new chief executive officer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Now, I need you to understand something crucial about how this all began because the seeds of what happened last weekend were planted 3 years ago on a Tuesday morning, when I made a decision that would change everything. But first, let me paint you the picture of who I was in my family's eyes versus who I actually am, because that gap between perception and reality is where this entire story lives. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 28 years old. To anyone who knew me casually, I was the younger sister who never quite figured it out. While my older sister Jessica blazed through college with a business degree, landed impressive internships, and climbed steadily up the corporate ladder at Morrison & Associates Marketing, I seemed to drift. After finishing my communications degree at Arizona State, I'd held a series of what my family diplomatically called transitional jobs. Retail associate at Target, receptionist at a dental office, and for the past 8 months, barista at Corner Grind Cafe on Roosevelt Street in downtown Phoenix. Jessica never missed an opportunity to contrast our life trajectories. At family gatherings, she'd regale everyone with stories about her latest client presentations, her team management challenges, her strategic initiatives that saved the company thousands of dollars. Then the conversation would inevitably turn to me, and Jessica would offer that practiced smile, the one that managed to look supportive while somehow conveying disappointment. "Sarah's still finding her path," she'd say, as if I were a lost teenager rather than a woman in her late 20s. "Not everyone's cut out for the corporate world. There's nothing wrong with service work." The thing is, Jessica wasn't entirely wrong about the service work part. I genuinely enjoyed my job at Corner Grind. I liked the rhythm of the morning. Rush, the regular customers who knew my name, the satisfaction of crafting the perfect latte art. What she didn't understand was that the job served a purpose far beyond the hourly wage that appeared on my pay stubs. You see, while Jessica saw me in my green apron and wondered where I'd gone wrong, I was using those 8-hour shifts as the perfect cover for building something she couldn't have imagined in her most ambitious dreams. Every morning when I arrived at the cafe at 5:30, I'd spend the first hour before we opened reviewing financial reports on my laptop. During slow afternoon periods, I'd take calls in the storage room, speaking in hushed tones about acquisition, strategies, and market positioning. On my breaks, I'd disappear to the small office space I rented 3 blocks away, where I conducted video conferences with lawyers, accountants, and business partners. For 3 years, while my family assumed I was simply struggling to find direction, I had been systematically building a business empire. It started with a small digital marketing consultancy that I ran from my apartment, taking on clients who needed social media strategy and content creation. I was good at it, really good, and within 6 months I was earning more from that side business than I made at any of my real jobs. But instead of quitting and announcing my success, I made a different choice. I took every penny I earned and reinvested it. I bought other small marketing companies, merged them with mine, and slowly built what would become Meridian Digital Holdings. I operated in the shadows, using my coffee shop paycheck as my official income while my actual business generated revenue. That would have shocked my sister into stunned silence. The plan was always bigger than just proving I could be successful. I had spent years watching Jessica work at Morrison & Associates, listening to her complain about the leadership, the direction of the company, the missed opportunities. She had no idea that I was listening not just as a supportive sister, but as someone who was quietly researching her employer, studying their financials, identifying their weaknesses. Morrison & Associates was bleeding money. Their client retention was abysmal, their creative work was outdated, and their leadership was more concerned with maintaining their executive salaries than investing in the company's future. But they had something valuable that I wanted, something that went beyond their client list or their downtown office space. They had Jessica. My sister was genuinely talented, despite what I'm about to tell you about her behavior. She had good instincts for marketing strategy, and she worked harder than anyone else in that company. She was also completely undervalued by her current employers, passed over for promotion she deserved, and growing increasingly frustrated with the limitations of her role. I knew that if I could acquire Morrison & Associates and turn it around, Jessica could become the executive she was meant to be. She just needed better leadership. She needed me. The acquisition took 2 years to orchestrate. I had to be careful, working through intermediaries and shell companies to avoid any connection to my name. As far as Morrison & Associates board knew, they were being purchased by Meridian Digital Holdings, a successful marketing conglomerate with offices in 3 states. They had no reason to connect that company to the barista sister of one of their mid-level employees. The purchase was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in early March. By Friday evening, the board had met and decided that the company needed new leadership to navigate the transition. By the following Monday, they had offered me the position of interim CEO, with the understanding that I would take the role permanently if I could demonstrate results in the first 6 months. I accepted, of course, but I asked for 2 weeks before making any public announcement about my appointment. I told them I needed time to finalize some personal commitments before taking on the responsibility. What I really needed was time to decide how to tell my family, and specifically, how to tell Jessica. That's where our story from last Saturday comes in, because instead of having a quiet conversation with my sister about my new role in her professional life, I found myself sitting at my parents' dinner table listening to her deliver what she clearly intended to be the definitive statement about my place in the Chen family hierarchy. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My father had just been promoted to senior loan officer at Copper State Bank, a position he'd been working toward for nearly a decade. My mother had spent all afternoon preparing his favorite meal, beef and broccoli with homemade noodles, and she'd invited Jessica and her boyfriend David to join us for what should have been a joyful family gathering. I'd driven over from my apartment in my 8-year-old Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college because it was practical and didn't draw attention. I was wearing black slacks and a simple blue sweater. Nothing fancy, but clean and appropriate for a family dinner. When I walked into my parents' house on Maple Street in the quiet suburb of Ahwatukee, I could hear Jessica's laughter coming from the living room. She was already holding court, of course. My sister had this way of filling a room with her presence, not in an unpleasant way, but in a way that made everyone else feel like supporting characters in her story. She was telling my parents about her latest project at Morrison & Associates, some campaign for a local restaurant chain that she'd apparently single-handedly saved from disaster. The client was ready to pull out completely, she was saying, as I hung my jacket by the front door. But I convinced them to give us one more shot. I stayed late 3 nights in a row, completely rebuilt the strategy from scratch, and presented it to their board myself. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," my mother said. "You work so hard." David, Jessica's boyfriend of about a year, was nodding along with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested he'd heard this story before but was still impressed by it. David worked in finance, something with investment portfolios that I'd never paid close attention to, and he and Jessica made what they considered to be a power couple. They both drove luxury cars, lived in a high-rise apartment downtown, and frequently posted photos from expensive restaurants and weekend getaways. "Sarah's here," my father called out as I entered the living room. Jessica looked up from the couch where she was sitting with David, and her smile shifted almost imperceptibly. Not unfriendly exactly, but the kind of smile you might give to a distant relative you feel obligated to acknowledge. "Hey, little sister," she said. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "How's the coffee business treating you?" There it was, right from the start. The coffee business. Not my job, not work, but the coffee business. Said with just enough emphasis to remind everyone in the room that while she had a career, I had a coffee business. "Can't complain," I replied, settling into the armchair across from them. "Same as always." "Sarah works at that cute little cafe downtown," my mother explained to David, though I was fairly certain he already knew this. "Corner grind. They make excellent pastries." "That's nice," David said politely. "Food service is important work." I caught the slight wince that crossed Jessica's face when he said food service. She'd probably spent considerable effort positioning my job as something quaint and temporary when she talked to David about her family, and his blunt categorization wasn't helping her narrative. "It's just temporary," Jessica said quickly. "Sarah's still figuring out what she wants to do long term." The assumption in that statement stung more than the words themselves. Still figuring out what I wanted to do. As if my nearly 3 decades of life had been spent in some kind of extended adolescence, waiting for the real adults to help me find direction. Dinner conversation flowed around topics that safely included everyone. My father's promotion, my mother's garden, David's recent business trip to San Diego, Jessica's upcoming presentation to a potential new client. I listened and contributed when appropriate, but mostly I found myself studying the dynamics at the table. My parents were clearly proud of Jessica, and why wouldn't they be? She was articulate, confident, successful by any conventional measure. When she talked about her work, she used language that sounded important and strategic. When I talked about my work, well, I mostly didn't. What was I supposed to say? That I'd made 47 lattes today and restocked the pastry case twice? Of course, I could have said that I'd also spent my lunch break reviewing acquisition reports for 2 companies in Colorado, or that I'd approved a marketing budget that was larger than Jessica's annual salary. But those weren't conversations. That made sense in the context of who everyone thought I was. The turning point came during dessert. My mother had made my father's favorite chocolate cake, and we were all sitting around the table with coffee and tea, the conversation relaxed and meandering. David had been asking about our childhood, and Jessica was telling stories about our high school years. "Sarah was always the creative one," she was saying. "Very artistic, very dreamy. I was more practical, more focused on real-world applications." "That's not exactly how I remember it," I said mildly. Jessica laughed. "Oh, come on, Sarah. You spent most of high school writing poetry and taking photographs. I was in student, government, and debate club, building skills I actually use in my career. Photography and writing are skills," I pointed out. "Sure, but not professional skills, not skills that translate to the business world." And there it was, the subtle dismissal that I'd been hearing my entire adult life. Jessica had somehow decided that anything I was interested in or good at was automatically less valuable than anything she was interested in or good at. "Actually," David said, clearly trying to be supportive, "creative skills are really important in marketing. Visual communication, storytelling, understanding audience psychology. Those are all valuable in the business world." I appreciated the gesture, but Jessica's response made it clear that she wasn't interested in having her narrative challenged. "Of course, creativity matters," she said, "but you need business fundamentals too. Strategy, client management, budget oversight, team leadership. The creative stuff is just one piece of a much larger puzzle." She turned to me with what she probably thought was an encouraging smile. "That's actually something you might think. About Sarah. If you're interested in the creative side of business, there are ways to build on that. You could go back to school, get a marketing degree, start as an assistant somewhere and work your way up. The condescension in her suggestion was breathtaking. Go back to school, start as an assistant, work my way up, as if I were a college dropout who needed career guidance from my older sister, rather than someone who already owned the company she worked for. I'll keep that in mind, I said evenly. I'm serious, Sarah. You're still young enough to make a real change. Look at me, I'm only 31, and I'm already a senior account director. By the time I'm 35, I'll probably be a vice president. But that didn't happen by accident. It happened because I made strategic choices and worked towards specific goals. My father cleared his throat. Both of you girls have done well. Success looks different for different people. Dad, I appreciate you trying to be fair, Jessica said. But let's be realistic. I'm not trying to be mean, but there is a difference between choosing a career path and just taking whatever job pays the bills. She gestured toward me with her coffee cup. Sarah works at a coffee shop. I manage marketing campaigns for million-dollar-day clients. Those aren't equivalent accomplishments. The room went quiet. My mother was staring at her cake plate. David was suddenly very interested in his phone. My father was cutting his remaining cake into increasingly smaller pieces. Jessica, that's enough, my mother said quietly. But Jessica was just getting started. I could see it in her posture, the way she straightened up and looked around the table like she was about to deliver a presentation to a boardroom full of executives. No, Mom, someone needs to say this. I love Sarah, but I'm tired of pretending that we're both equally successful when we're clearly not. She stood up, swaying slightly, and I realized she'd had more wine with dinner than I'd noticed. I work with high-level executives every day. CEOs, marketing directors, business owners who've built companies from the ground up. These are people who understand what it means to have ambition, to set goals and achieve them. She was looking directly at me now, and her voice was getting louder. When they ask me about my family, what am I supposed to say? That my sister chose to be a barista? That she's 28 years old and still hasn't figured out what she wants to be when she grows up? The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Jessica wasn't finished. I'm tired of making excuses for you, Sarah. I'm tired of telling people that you're finding yourself or exploring your options. You're not exploring anything. You're hiding. She started pacing behind her chair, clearly building toward something. Do you know what it's like for me at work? Do you know how embarrassing it is when successful people ask about my family? And I have to explain that my sister works in food service? Jessica, sit down, my father said firmly. No, Dad. Someone needs to have this conversation. Sarah needs to understand that her choices don't just affect her. They affect all of us. She turned back to me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like panic. I'm up for a promotion next month, Vice President of Client Services. Do you think it helps my case when the partners know that my sister serves coffee for a living? There it was. The real issue wasn't my life choices or my potential or my happiness. The real issue was how my existence affected Jessica's professional image. So here's what I think needs to happen, she continued, and now she was definitely giving a presentation. I think it's time for some tough love. Sarah, you need to get serious about your life. You need to stop playing around with temporary jobs and start building a real career. She looked around the table like she was gathering support for her proposal. And until that happens, maybe we should think carefully about family events. That might put my professional reputation at risk. My mother gasped. Jessica, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Mom. I've worked too hard to build my career to have it undermined by associations that don't reflect well on my judgment or my family's values. David was staring at his girlfriend like he'd never seen her before. Jess, maybe you should what? Should continue to enable Sarah's lack of direction? Should keep pretending that this is normal? She gestured toward me again, and I could see that her hands were shaking slightly. Sarah made a choice. She chose to work at a coffee shop instead of pursuing a real career. Fine, that's her choice to make, but she doesn't get to drag the rest of us down with her. I stood up slowly, folding my napkin and placing it beside my plate. The room was completely silent except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "You're absolutely right, Jessica," I said quietly. "Choices do have consequences." I walked to the front hallway and picked up my jacket. Behind me, I could hear the scraping of chairs as people shifted uncomfortably. "I'll see you all very soon," I said, not looking back. I drove home to my downtown loft in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of the city passing by outside my windows. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Phoenix skyline. Tomorrow was Sunday. Monday morning, I would walk into Morrison & Associates as their new CEO. Tuesday, there would be an all-hands meeting where I would be introduced to the entire staff, including Jessica. I had 2 days to decide how I wanted to handle what came next. But first, I had a phone call to make to the board chair, because Jessica's little speech had just made my decision much easier. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Arizona sunshine that made everything look sharper, more defined. I woke up in my downtown loft at 7:30, which was unusually late for me, but Saturday night had been restless. I'd spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying Jessica's words and thinking about how drastically everything was about to change. My apartment reflected none of the financial success I'd achieved over the past 3 years. I deliberately kept it modest, comfortable, but not luxurious. Nothing that would raise questions if family or friends visited. The furniture was nice, but not expensive. The kind of pieces you might find at a mid-range retailer rather than a designer showroom. The only hints of my actual lifestyle were subtle. The high-end laptop on my desk, the expensive coffee machine in the kitchen, the view from the 20th floor that cost more per month than Jessica knew I made in 3. I made coffee using beans from a small roaster in Portland, something I'd discovered during a business trip that had nothing to do with Corner Grind Cafe, and settled onto my couch with my phone. 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 text messages from David that I wasn't ready to read, and 1 voicemail from Jessica that I deleted without listening to. My mother's messages were predictable in their worry and confusion. The first, sent at 11:30 the night before. "Honey, please, call when you get this." Jessica didn't mean what she said. She had too much wine. The second, sent an hour later. "Your father and I want to talk to you. Can you come over for breakfast?" The third, sent this morning. "Sarah, please don't let Jessica's words hurt you. She's just stressed about work." The thing that struck me about my mother's messages was how they assumed I was the injured party, the one who needed comfort and reassurance. She couldn't imagine that I might be the one holding all the cards, that Jessica's stress about work was about to become infinitely more complicated. I spent the morning reviewing documents that my lawyer, Patricia Vance, had prepared for Monday's transition. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in corporate acquisitions and had been invaluable in structuring the Morrison & Associates purchase. She'd warned me repeatedly about the complexities of suddenly becoming an employee's supervisor, especially when that employee was family. "Corporate dynamics are tricky enough without personal relationships," she told me during our last meeting. "You'll need to be extremely careful about how you handle this. Any appearance of favoritism or personal vendetta could create legal liability for both you and the company." I understood her concerns, but Patricia didn't know Jessica the way I did. My sister wasn't the type to create workplace drama or file complaints about unfair treatment. She was too proud, too invested in her professional image. If anything, she'd work twice as hard to prove she deserved her position regardless of our family connection. At least, that's what I hoped. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 Monday morning, an hour before the general staff arrived. I would spend that time with Margaret Wells, the board chair, and the other directors, reviewing the transition, plan and finalizing my appointment. At 9:15, there would be an all-staff meeting in the main conference room where my appointment would be announced. Jessica usually arrived at work around 8:30, which meant she'd have about 15 minutes to process the news before facing me in front of the entire company. I wondered if that would be enough time for her to compose herself, or if the shock would leave her speechless. My phone rang at noon, interrupting my document review. The caller ID showed my father's number. "Hi, Dad." "Sarah." His voice was careful, measured. "Your mother and I were hoping you might join us for lunch. Nothing formal, just sandwiches at home." I could hear my mother's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not really ready for a family discussion right now." "I understand. But sweetheart, I think you should know that Jessica called this morning. She feels terrible about last night." I almost laughed at that. Jessica felt terrible, but not terrible enough to call me directly and apologize. Terrible enough to involve our parents as intermediaries, but not terrible enough to take responsibility for her own words. "What did she say?" My father was quiet for a moment. "She said she was upset about some situation at work, and she took it out on you unfairly. She wants to make things right." Some situation at work? If only he knew. "Dad, I need you to understand something. What happened last night wasn't just Jessica having a bad day or drinking too much wine. Those were things she's been thinking for a long time." She meant every word. "I don't believe that." "She told me I was an embarrassment to the family. She said my existence was damaging her professional reputation. She suggested I shouldn't be included in family events." "Which part of that do you think she didn't mean?" My father sighed heavily. "She's been under a lot of pressure at work lately. There are rumors about changes at her company, possible layoffs, management restructuring. She's worried about her job security." The irony was almost too much. Jessica was worried about management restructuring at a company where I was about to become the management. She was stressed about job security while working for her own sister. "I'm sure she is." "Worried," I said. "But that doesn't excuse what she said." "Of course not. I'm not defending her behavior. I'm just trying to help you understand where it came from." "I understand perfectly where it came from, Dad. It came from Jessica's belief that her career is more important than my feelings and that my life choices reflect poorly on her success. Those aren't stress responses. Those are character judgments." We talked for a few more minutes, my father trying to broker peace between his daughters, me trying to prepare him for the conversation we'd be having in a few days when everything came out. I couldn't tell him what was coming. Not yet. But I could try to help him understand that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with apologies and good intentions. After we hung up, I spent the afternoon at Corner Grind, working my regular Sunday shift. It felt strange, knowing it would be one of my last days as a barista, at least in terms of maintaining my cover. I'd already spoken with the owner, Marcus, about transitioning to part-time hours. I'd told him I was starting a consulting business. That would require more time commitment, which was technically true, just not in the way he understood. Marcus was a good guy in his early 40s who'd opened Corner Grind 5 years earlier, after leaving a corporate marketing job that had burned him out. He knew I was overqualified for coffee shop work, but he'd never pushed for details about my background or my long-term plans. That mutual respect for privacy was one of the reasons I'd stayed at the job as long as I had. "You've been a great employee," he told me as I wiped down tables during the afternoon lull. "I hate to lose you, but I'm glad things are working out. With your business." If only he knew how much things were working out. The evening passed quietly. I ordered Thai food from my favorite restaurant downtown, watched a documentary about corporate mergers and acquisitions that felt oddly relevant to my current situation, and went to bed early. Tomorrow would be the most important day of my professional life, and I wanted to be sharp. I woke up Monday morning at 5:30, the same time I would have gotten up for my opening shift at Corner Grind. The difference was that instead of putting on my green apron and comfortable shoes, I was selecting a charcoal gray suit that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. The suit was perfectly tailored, conservatively cut, designed to convey authority without ostentation. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying makeup with more precision than I'd used in months. Foundation to even my complexion, concealer to hide the shadows under my eyes from yesterday's restless sleep, mascara and subtle eyeliner to sharpen my gaze. When I was finished, I looked like a different person. Not the casual barista my family knew, but the CEO I was about to become. The drive to Morrison & Associates took 15 minutes through downtown Phoenix. I'd made this drive dozens of times before, usually at night when I was certain Jessica wouldn't be there, conducting meetings with Patricia or reviewing financial documents in the conference room that would soon be mine. But this morning felt different. This morning, I wasn't sneaking around or hiding my identity. This morning, I was coming home. Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass office building on Central Avenue. The company had been founded 15 years earlier by Robert Morrison, a former advertising executive who'd built a solid, regional reputation before retiring and selling to a larger firm. That firm had struggled to maintain Morrison's client relationships and creative standards, which was how the company had ended up hemorrhaging money and clients before my acquisition. I parked in the space marked "Reserved for CEO," which felt surreal after months of parking on the street when I visited after hours. The security guard in the lobby recognized me, though he looked confused to see me so early and dressed so formally. "Good morning, Ms. Chen. Early meeting today?" "Something like that," I replied, heading for the elevator to the executive floor. Margaret Wells was already waiting in the conference room when I arrived, along with the 5 other board members. Margaret was a formidable woman in her early 60s, a former marketing executive herself who'd built and sold 2 companies before transitioning to board positions and consulting work. She'd been instrumental in identifying Morrison & Associates as an acquisition target and convincing the other board members that I was the right person to turn it around. "Good morning, Sarah. Ready for your first day as CEO?" "As ready as anyone can be." The board meeting lasted exactly 45 minutes. We covered the transition timeline, the key priorities for my first 90 days, and the metrics by which my performance would be evaluated. The conversation was businesslike and efficient, with none of the drama or emotion that had characterized Saturday night's family dinner. "There is one issue we should address," Margaret said as we wrapped up. "Your sister works here." "I'm aware." "Have you given thought to how you want to handle that relationship professionally?" "Jessica is a talented marketing director. As long as she continues to perform at her current level, her family connection to me won't affect her employment. If her performance declines, or if she creates workplace issues related to our personal relationship, I'll address those situations as they arise." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. Personal relationships can complicate business decisions, but they don't have to derail them." At 8:45, I walked down to the main office floor for the first time as CEO. The space was open concept, with individual workstations arranged in clusters around collaborative areas. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided natural light and views of downtown Phoenix. It was a pleasant environment, though I could see signs of the company's recent struggles in the empty desks and outdated equipment. Jessica's workspace was in the northeast corner near the windows, a reflection of her seniority and status within the company. I could see her at her desk, focused on her computer screen, wearing a navy blazer and white blouse that projected professional competence. She looked like someone who belonged in a corporate environment, someone who'd earned her position through hard work and talent. She had no idea that everything was about to change. At 9 o'clock sharp, Margaret stepped to the front of the main conference room and called for everyone's attention. The staff filed in gradually, about 30 people, total, representing account management, creative services, media planning, and administrative support. Jessica entered with her team, taking a seat near the middle of the room, notepad and pen ready to take notes on whatever announcement was coming. I waited in the smaller conference room adjacent to the main space, watching through the glass partition as the staff settled into their seats. Some looked curious, others apprehensive. In a company that had been struggling financially, an all-hands meeting could mean anything from a major new client to significant layoffs. Margaret began with brief comments about the company's recent acquisition and the need for new leadership to guide Morrison & Associates through its next phase of growth. She spoke in the kind of corporate language that managed to convey both optimism and urgency without promising specific outcomes. The board has conducted an extensive search for the right leader to take Morrison & Associates forward, she continued. We needed someone with deep marketing expertise, proven business leadership experience, and the vision to transform this company into the industry leader we know it can become. I could see Jessica leaning forward slightly, probably wondering if she knew the new CEO or if this person might have connections to clients or opportunities that could benefit her career. I'm pleased to introduce you to Sarah Chen, your new Chief Executive Officer. The moment Margaret said my name, the room went completely silent. Not the attentive silence of people waiting to hear more, but the stunned silence of people trying to process information that didn't compute with their understanding of reality. Jessica's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something that looked like panic. She turned to look at the doorway where I was about to appear, her mouth slightly open, her pen frozen halfway to her notepad. I walked into the main conference room with what I hoped was appropriate CEO confidence. Composed, professional, ready to lead. The room remained silent as I took my place beside Margaret at the front. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here and to begin working with all of you to build Morrison & Associates into the marketing firm Phoenix deserves. Churcher Part 3. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. I could see people looking around at each other, trying to gauge whether they had heard correctly, whether the Sarah Chen standing in front of them was the same Sarah Chen they'd heard Jessica mention in passing as her sister who worked in food service. Jessica herself looked like she'd been physically struck. All the color had drained from her face, and she was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been betrayal. I know this transition represents a significant change for everyone, I continued, keeping my voice steady and professional. Over the next few weeks, I'll be meeting individually with each department head and team leader to discuss our current projects, our client relationships, and our strategic priorities moving forward. A woman in the front row, someone from the administrative team whose name I didn't yet know, raised her hand tentatively. Yes? Will there be any immediate changes to staffing or operations? It was a good question, the kind that demonstrated people were thinking practically about how this leadership change would affect their daily work lives. No immediate changes to staffing. My priority is to understand how this company operates, what's working well, and where we have opportunities for improvement. Any operational changes will be implemented thoughtfully and with plenty of advance notice. Another hand went up, this one from a man in his 30s whom I recognized as Tom Bradley, one of the senior account managers. What's your background in marketing, Sarah? I mean, Ms. Chen? I could see Jessica wince slightly at the informality of the question, probably worried that her colleagues would assume they could treat me casually because of our family connection. I've spent the past 3 years building Meridian Digital Holdings, a marketing consultancy that specializes in digital strategy and brand development. Prior to that, I worked with several small businesses on marketing and business development projects. It was technically accurate, though it left out the details about starting those businesses from my apartment while working retail jobs and carefully concealed the scope and success of my actual operations. Meridian Holdings acquired Morrison & Associates as part of our expansion into the Arizona market, I added. I'm here because I believe this company has tremendous potential that hasn't been fully realized. Tom nodded, apparently satisfied with my answer. A few other staff members asked questions about the acquisition timeline, the company's financial stability, and my plans for client development. I answered each question professionally, trying to strike a balance between confidence and humility. Jessica didn't ask any questions. She sat in her chair, taking notes that I suspected were more about processing her shock than about recording information for later reference. Occasionally, she would look up at me, and I could see her trying to reconcile the woman in the suit at the front of the room with the sister she'd dismissed as directionless just 2 days earlier. After 15 minutes of questions, Margaret wrapped up the meeting and reminded everyone that they could schedule time with me over the coming weeks to discuss their roles and responsibilities. As people filed out of the conference room, several stopped to introduce themselves or welcome me to the company. I shook hands and made small talk, playing the part of the new CEO getting to know her team. Jessica was one of the last to leave. She approached slowly, and I could see her colleagues, watching curiously to see how we would interact. "Congratulations," she said quietly, extending her hand for a formal handshake. "I look forward to working with you." Her voice was controlled, professional, but I could hear the tremor underneath. This was Jessica trying to navigate uncharted territory, trying to figure out how to be my employee while also being my sister. "Thank you, Jessica. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you later this week to discuss your projects and your team's priorities." "Of course. I'll have my assistant coordinate with yours." It was surreal, this formal exchange between sisters who had grown up sharing a bedroom and fighting over television channels. But it was also necessary. Whatever personal issues we needed to resolve would have to wait until we could figure out how to work together professionally. The rest of my first day as CEO was a whirlwind of meetings, introductions, and information downloads. I met with the Chief Financial Officer, a competent woman named Linda Hayes, who walked me through the company's current financial position and the cash flow challenges that had led to the acquisition. I reviewed client contracts with Tom Bradley and learned about the retention issues that were affecting revenue. I toured the creative department and saw examples of recent work that ranged from brilliant to mediocre. By lunchtime, I had a clear picture of why Morrison & Associates had been struggling. The company had good people and solid client relationships, but it lacked strategic direction and operational efficiency. The previous leadership had been reactive rather than proactive, responding to problems rather than anticipating opportunities. I ate lunch alone in my new office, reviewing organizational charts and employee files while working through a salad from the restaurant downstairs. My office was spacious and well-appointed, with a mahogany desk, leather chairs, and windows that provided a panoramic view of downtown Phoenix. It was the kind of office that was designed to impress clients and intimidate competitors. Around 2 p.m, my assistant, Rebecca, knocked on my door to let me know that Jessica had requested a meeting. She said it was urgent, Rebecca added. "Should I schedule something for later this week?" "No, let's go ahead and meet now. Send her in." Jessica entered my office with the same professional composure she'd maintained all morning, but I could see the strain around her eyes. She closed the door behind her and stood uncertainly near the chairs in front of my desk. "Please, sit down." She took the chair on the left, crossing her legs and placing her hands in her lap in a posture that projected confidence despite the circumstances. "I want to address the elephant in the room," she said without preamble. "Which elephant would that be?" "The fact that my sister is now my boss, and I had no idea until this morning that you were even involved in business," let alone successful enough to buy the company where I work. Her directness was typical Jessica, and I appreciated that she wasn't trying to dance around the obvious issues. What would you like to know? I'd like to know how this happened. I'd like to understand how you went from serving coffee to owning a marketing firm without anyone in our family knowing about it. I leaned back in my chair, considering how much to explain. Jessica deserved some answers, both as my sister and as an employee whose professional world had just been turned upside down. I've been building Meridian Holdings for 3 years. The coffee shop job was cover, a way to maintain a simple public profile while I focused on growing the business. But why? Why the secrecy? Because I wanted to build something real before I told anyone about it. Because I was tired of being seen as the sister who couldn't figure out her life. Because I knew that if I announced my plans before I had results, people would assume I was being unrealistic or naive. Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing this information. So Saturday night, when I said all those things about your lack of ambition and professional direction, you were describing someone who doesn't exist. You were talking about your perception of me, not about who I actually am. I could see her remembering the specific words she'd used, the cruelty of her assessment of my life choices, the dismissive way she'd talked about my work and my future. I owe you an apology. Yes, you do. I'm sorry, Sarah. I was completely wrong about you, about your job, about your potential. I said things that were hurtful and unfair. I appreciated the apology, but it felt incomplete somehow, as if she was apologizing for being factually incorrect rather than for being deliberately cruel. Jessica, the problem wasn't that you misunderstood my career situation. The problem was that you thought it was acceptable to publicly humiliate me based on your assumptions about my worth. She looked down at her hands. You're right. Even if I had been just a barista with no other ambitions, your behavior Saturday night was inexcusable. You don't get to decide that someone else's honest work makes them an embarrassment to the family. I know. I was upset about work, worried about my promotion, and I took it out on you. That doesn't excuse what I said, but it explains why I was so defensive about professional success. This was the closest to real accountability I was likely to get from Jessica, at least for now. She was acknowledging that her behavior was wrong, even if she wasn't fully grasping the deeper issues about respect and family loyalty. Where do we go from here? She asked. Professionally, you continue doing your job. You're a talented marketing director, and this company needs your skills and experience. Personally, we'll figure out how to rebuild our relationship over time. And Saturday night? Saturday night doesn't disappear because you've apologized. Trust takes time to rebuild, Jessica, but we can start the process. She nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't planning to fire her or sabotage her career out of revenge. There's something else I need to tell you, she said. I called Mom and Dad yesterday and told them I'd made a mistake, that I was stressed about work, and took it out on you unfairly. What did you tell them about this? I gestured around the office. Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Good. I'd like to be the one to tell them about the company and my role here. They deserve to hear it from me. When? Soon, probably this weekend. We talked for a few more minutes about practical matters, how we would interact in meetings, whether our personal relationship would affect her opportunities for advancement, how we would handle any conflicts between our professional and family obligations. It was a strange conversation, negotiating the boundaries between sisterhood and corporate hierarchy, but it felt necessary. When Jessica left my office, I felt emotionally drained but cautiously optimistic. We had a long way to go before our relationship recovered from Saturday night's damage, but at least we were talking honestly about the challenges ahead. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, strategic planning sessions, and late nights reviewing financial reports. I met individually with each department head, learning about their teams, their current projects, and their concerns about the company's direction. I reviewed every major client contract and identified several opportunities for improved service, delivery, and expanded relationships. Jessica and I maintained professional courtesy in our interactions. She participated actively in meetings, provided detailed reports on her team's projects, and showed no signs of resentment about our change dynamic. If anything, she seemed to be working harder than usual, as if she wanted to prove that she deserved her position regardless of our family connection. By Friday afternoon, I was confident that Morrison & Associates could be turned around with the right strategic investments and operational improvements. The staff was talented and motivated. The client base was solid, if not spectacular, and the market opportunities in Phoenix were significant. I was also exhausted. Running a company was demanding work under normal circumstances, but doing it while navigating a complicated family situation added an extra layer of complexity that I hadn't fully anticipated. Friday evening, I drove home to my downtown loft, feeling accomplished but emotionally depleted. I poured myself a glass of wine, ordered pizza from my favorite place on Roosevelt Row, and tried to decompress from the most intense week of my professional life. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Haven't heard from you all week. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, realizing that in the chaos of my first week as CEO, I hadn't spoken to either of my parents since Sunday's phone call with my father. They had no idea what had happened, no understanding of how dramatically everything had changed. Tomorrow, I would need to have another difficult conversation with my family. But tonight, I was going to eat pizza, watch mindless television, and try to forget about corporate strategy and family dynamics for a few hours. Part 4. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, unusual weather for Phoenix that seemed to match my mood about the conversation I needed to have with my parents. I'd spent most of Friday night rehearsing different ways to explain the past week's developments, trying to find an approach that would help them understand without making them feel deceived or excluded. I called my mother at 9 after I knew she'd finished her morning coffee and weekend newspaper ritual. "Sarah, I was starting to worry. Jessica said you'd been busy with work this week." "I have been busy. Mom, are you and Dad free this afternoon? I'd like to come over and talk to you about some things." There was a pause. In our family, requests for serious conversations were usually preceded by advance notice and careful scheduling. Spontaneous family meetings typically meant bad news. "Of course, honey. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Actually, everything's really good. I just have some news to share." "What kind of news?" "The kind that's better delivered in person. Would 2 o'clock work?" "Perfect. Your father's planning to work in the garden this afternoon, but I'll make sure he's available." I spent the morning cleaning my apartment and reviewing the documents I wanted to show my parents. Financial statements, business registrations, newspaper articles about the Morrison & Associates acquisition. Proof that their assumptions about my life had been as wrong as Jessica's. The drive to my parents' house in Ahwatukee took 25 minutes through suburban neighborhoods that looked exactly like the one where I'd grown up. Neat lawns, 2-car garages, houses that represented middle-class stability and conventional success. The kind of environment where working at a coffee shop was seen as temporary at best, embarrassing at worst. My father was indeed working in the garden when I arrived, transplanting seedlings in the small vegetable plot he maintained behind their house. My mother met me at the front door with the kind of careful smile that parents use when they're not sure what to expect from their children. "You look nice," she said, noticing the casual but expensive clothes I'd chosen for this conversation. "Different." "Thanks, Mom." We settled in the living room, the same room where Jessica had delivered her ultimatum about my professional inadequacy just 1 week earlier. My father joined us after washing the dirt from his hands, settling into his favorite armchair with the expression of someone preparing for potentially difficult news. "So," my mother said, "what did you want to talk about?" I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo from Monday morning's all-hands meeting at Morrison & Associates. In the picture, I was standing at the front of the conference room, professional and confident, clearly in a position of authority. This was taken on Monday morning. I was being introduced to the staff at Morrison & Associates Marketing as their new chief executive officer. My parents stared at the photo, then looked at me, then looked at the photo again. My father was the first to speak. "I don't understand." "I own Morrison & Associates, Dad. I bought the company 6 months ago through my business, Meridian Digital Holdings. On Monday, I officially took over as CEO." The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence in the conference room earlier that week. This was the silence of parents trying to reconcile contradictory information about their child, trying to understand how someone they thought they knew completely had been living a secret life. "But you work at a coffee shop," my mother said, weakly. "I worked at a coffee shop as cover while I built my business. For the past 3 years, I've been developing and acquiring marketing companies throughout the Southwest. Morrison & Associates was my largest acquisition to date. I spent the next hour explaining everything. The digital marketing consultancy I'd started from my apartment, the systematic growth strategy that had led to multiple acquisitions, the careful financial planning that had allowed me to purchase $1 million company while maintaining the appearance of earning minimum wage." My parents listened with expressions that shifted from confusion to amazement to something that might have been pride. They asked good questions about the business model, the acquisition process, and my long-term strategic plans. They were both intelligent people who understood business concepts, even if they'd never imagined their younger daughter was building a corporate empire. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked when I'd finished the basic explanation. "Because I wanted to build something real before I announced it. Because I was tired of being seen as the sister who couldn't figure out her life. Because I knew that if people understood what I was doing before I had results to show for it, they'd either dismiss it as unrealistic or try to manage it for me." My father nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But Sarah, we would have been supportive. We would have been proud of your ambition even if the results weren't guaranteed. Would you? Or would you have worried that I was being naive? Would you have suggested I keep my day job as backup? Would you have compared my unproven business ideas to Jessica's conventional career success?" They couldn't answer that question, honestly, without admitting that I was probably right, that they likely would have discouraged me from taking the risks that had led to my success. "This means," my mother started, then stopped, processing the implications. "This means Jessica works for me now." "Yes." "How is she handling that?" "She's handling it professionally. We had a difficult conversation on Monday, but we're working through the personal issues while maintaining appropriate workplace boundaries." "What about Saturday night?" my father asked. "What she said about your job, your future, your impact on the family's reputation." "What about it?" "She was completely wrong. She was cruel to you based on assumptions that weren't even true." I appreciated that my father was willing to acknowledge the severity of Jessica's behavior, but I needed him to understand something more important. "Dad, the problem with Saturday night wasn't that Jessica was factually incorrect about my career. The problem was that she thought it was acceptable to treat me that way, regardless of what kind of work I was doing." My mother looked uncomfortable. She was upset about her own work situation. She'd been stressed for weeks about potential layoffs and management changes, which she now knows were related to my acquisition of the company. "But Mom, being stressed about work doesn't excuse publicly humiliating your sister. Even if I really had been just a barista with no other ambitions, Jessica's behavior was inexcusable." We talked through the implications of this revelation for another hour. How it would affect family dynamics, whether Jessica's position at the company created conflicts of interest, what it meant for their understanding of both daughters' characters and capabilities. "I'm proud of you," my father said finally. I'm amazed by what you've accomplished, and I'm proud of how you've handled a very complicated situation with your sister. I'm proud too, my mother added, but I'm also sorry that you felt like you couldn't share this part of your life with us. I'm sharing it now. Yes, but after the fact. After you'd already succeeded beyond anything we could have imagined. That was the crux of it, really. I'd succeeded beyond what my family could have imagined because they'd never tried to imagine it. They'd seen the coffee shop apron and stopped looking for anything deeper, anything more ambitious or complex. What happens next? My mother asked. Next, I focus on growing Morrison & Associates into the marketing firm it should be. I work on rebuilding my relationship with Jessica. I keep building Meridian Holdings. I figure out how to balance being a CEO with being a daughter and sister. And the coffee shop? I'm transitioning to part-time there. I want to maintain some connection to that world, at least for now. It keeps me grounded. When I left my parents' house that afternoon, I felt lighter somehow. The weight of maintaining two separate identities had been more exhausting than I'd realized. Being able to talk honestly about my work, my ambitions, and my accomplishments felt like a kind of liberation. My phone buzzed as I was driving home. A text from Jessica. Mom called. She said you told them about the company. Thank you for handling that conversation yourself. I pulled over to respond. It was the right thing to do. See you Monday. Her reply came quickly. Looking forward to it. And for the first time since Saturday night's disaster, that felt like it might actually be true. Part 5. Monday morning of my second week as CEO felt different from the first. The novelty of my new role had worn off, replaced by the comfortable rhythm of actual leadership responsibilities. I arrived at the office at 7:30, an hour before most of the staff, and used the quiet time to review weekend emails and prepare for the day's meetings. Rebecca had left my schedule on my desk, neatly organized and color-coded. Department head meetings in the morning, client calls in the afternoon, and a strategic planning session with Margaret Wells at 4 o'clock. It was the kind of packed schedule that would have overwhelmed me a year ago, but now felt manageable and energizing. Jessica arrived at her usual time, 8:30, looking professional and composed. Through my office windows, I could see her settling into her workspace, reviewing her own schedule, preparing for what I knew would be a busy week for the marketing team. We'd established a pattern over the past few days of friendly but appropriately distant workplace interactions, and it seemed to be working for both of us. At 9 o'clock, I had my first meeting with Linda Hayes, the CFO, to review the quarterly financial projections. Linda was a methodical woman in her early 50s who'd been with Morrison & Associates for 8 years, through several leadership changes and financial challenges. She'd initially been skeptical of my appointment, clearly wondering whether someone who appeared to be in her late 20s could handle the complexities of corporate financial management. The quarterly financial projections spread across Linda's laptop screen told a story of gradual recovery punctuated by concerning dips in revenue retention. Morrison & Associates had been hemorrhaging clients for 18 months, not through dramatic departures, but through the slow erosion of contracts that weren't being renewed and new business pitches that consistently fell short. The Peterson Group dropped us last month, Linda explained, highlighting a particularly significant revenue loss. They'd been with us for 4 years, but they said our creative work had become stale and predictable. I studied the client retention charts, noting patterns that suggested deeper systemic issues than just creative staleness. What's our current client satisfaction rating? We don't formally track satisfaction ratings. That explained a lot. Morrison & Associates had been operating on autopilot, assuming that delivering contracted services on time was sufficient to maintain relationships. They'd lost sight of the fact that marketing clients needed partners who could anticipate trends, challenge assumptions, and deliver breakthrough thinking. I want to implement quarterly client satisfaction surveys starting immediately, I told Linda. Not just project-specific feedback, but but strategic assessment of our value proposition and their evolving needs. Linda made notes on her tablet. Should I coordinate that with Jessica's team? They manage most of the ongoing client relationships. It was the first time someone had directly referenced my sister in a business context, and I appreciated Linda's matter-of-fact approach. Jessica was the marketing director. Client relationships fell under her purview. The fact that she was also my sister was irrelevant to the operational decision at hand. Yes, work with Jessica to design surveys that capture both tactical feedback and strategic insights. I want to understand not just how we're performing against current expectations, but how client needs are evolving and where we might be missing opportunities. We spent the next hour diving deeper into the financial data, identifying cost reduction opportunities and revenue growth potential. Linda was thorough and insightful, clearly relieved to be working with leadership that understood the difference between managing expenses and building sustainable profitability. My 10 o'clock meeting was with Tom Bradley, the senior account manager who'd questioned my qualifications during Monday's all-hands meeting. Tom had been with Morrison & Associates for 6 years and managed relationships with several major clients, including 2 that represented nearly 30% of the company's total revenue. "I'll be direct," Tom said as he settled into the chair across from my desk. "When Margaret announced you as CEO, my first thought was that the board had made a panic decision. Young, relatively unknown, family connection to existing staff. It looked like a recipe for disaster." I appreciated his honesty, even if his initial assessment stung slightly. And now I'm cautiously optimistic. The changes you've proposed this week suggest you understand both the strategic challenges and the operational realities we're facing. Tom had reason to be cautious. His 2 largest clients, Southwestern Insurance and Desert Tech Solutions, were both up for contract renewal within the next 6 months. If Morrison & Associates lost either account, the financial impact would be severe enough to require significant staff reductions. "Tell me about Southwestern Insurance," I said. "What's their primary concern with our current service delivery?" "Speed and innovation. They're in a competitive market with younger, more agile companies that are winning customers. Through digital marketing strategies we've been slow to adopt. Our account team is solid, but we're not pushing creative boundaries the way we used to." This was a recurring theme in my conversations with department heads. Morrison & Associates had built its reputation on reliable professional service, but reliable and professional weren't sufficient in a market where clients needed marketing partners who could help them disrupt traditional business models. What would it take to win the Southwestern renewal? A complete strategic overhaul of their brand positioning, a digital-first campaign that demonstrates we understand where their industry is heading, and probably a fee reduction to show good faith while we prove our new capabilities. Tom's assessment was blunt but realistic. Morrison & Associates would need to invest significantly in the Southwestern relationship, potentially taking a short-term financial hit to secure long-term retention. Put together a proposal for that strategic overhaul, full budget, timeline, and success metrics. I want to present it to Southwestern as a value-added service, not as an admission that our previous work was inadequate. Tom looked surprised. "You're willing to take that kind of financial risk on one client?" "I'm willing to invest in demonstrating our new capabilities. If we can successfully transform Southwestern's marketing approach, that becomes a case study for winning similar clients and upgrades with existing accounts." We discussed the Desert Tech situation, which was more complex. The company's leadership was satisfied with Morrison's current work, but was actively courting proposals from larger firms with more specialized technology expertise. Retaining that account would require expanding our service capabilities rather than just improving our creative output. "I'm planning to acquire a digital strategy firm within the next 6 months," I told Tom. "That acquisition would give us the technology expertise and specialized talent we need to compete for accounts like Desert Tech." "You're planning another acquisition already?" Morrison & Associates was my entry point into the Phoenix market, not my final destination. Meridian Holdings is designed to be a growth platform. Tom seemed to be processing this information, recalibrating his understanding of my ambitions and the company's future trajectory. How many companies are you planning to acquire? As many as make strategic sense. The goal is to build a full-service marketing and business development platform that can serve clients across multiple industries and market segments. Our conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering staffing needs, client development, strategies, and competitive positioning. Tom was smart and experienced, exactly the kind of senior talent Morrison & Associates needed to retain if the company was going to grow successfully. "One more thing," Tom said as he prepared to leave. "How do you want to handle questions about your family connection to Jessica? Clients are going to ask, especially once word gets out about your background." It was a legitimate concern. In the marketing industry, personal relationships could be seen as either assets or liabilities depending on how they were managed and perceived. Jessica earned her position based on her qualifications and performance. She'll continue to be evaluated on those criteria. If clients have concerns about family dynamics affecting business decisions, we'll address those concerns directly and professionally. And if Jessica's performance isn't meeting expectations, then we'll address performance issues the same way we would with any other employee. Professional standards don't change based on personal relationships. Tom nodded, apparently satisfied with my approach. As he reached the door, he turned back with a slight smile. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to do fine as CEO. You've got good instincts, and you're not afraid to make difficult decisions." My lunch meeting was with David Chen, the creative director who led Morrison's design and content development team. David was no relation to me despite sharing a last name, a coincidence that had led to some initial confusion when I was introduced to the staff. David was in his early 40s, a former freelance designer who'd joined Morrison & Associates 3 years earlier when his independent client base became too large to manage alone. He was talented but frustrated, clearly feeling constrained by the company's conservative approach to creative risk-taking. "Our creative work has become safe to the point of being boring," he said without preamble. "We're producing competent designs and functional copy, but nothing that makes clients excited about working with us or gets consumers excited about their products." David showed me examples of recent campaigns, contrasting them with more innovative work being produced by competitors. The difference was stark. Morrison's output was professional and polished, but lacked the creative spark that distinguished great marketing from adequate marketing. "What's holding the team back?" I asked. "Fear, mostly. Fear of client rejection, fear of leadership criticism, fear of trying something bold and having it fail." "Have you proposed more innovative approaches?" "Regularly. But the previous leadership always wanted to see multiple safe options alongside any creative risks, and clients almost always chose the safe options. This was a classic creative agency problem. Clients hired marketing firms because they wanted breakthrough thinking, but when presented with genuinely innovative ideas, they often retreated to familiar, conventional approaches. The result was a cycle of creative mediocrity that satisfied no one. What if we stopped presenting safe options? David looked intrigued. Meaning? Meaning we develop creative strategies that we believe will deliver exceptional results, and we present those strategies with confidence and conviction rather than hedging with conventional alternatives. That's risky. Clients might reject our recommendations. Some will. But the clients who embrace innovative thinking will become advocates for our work and referral sources for similar clients. We spent an hour discussing specific examples of creative opportunities the team had identified, but hadn't been able to pursue under previous leadership. David's frustration was evident, but so was his enthusiasm for the possibility of finally producing work that matched his creative ambitions. I want you to redesign our own marketing materials, I told him. Website, promotional materials, case study presentations. I want Morrison & Associates marketing to demonstrate the kind of innovative thinking we're capable of delivering for clients. What's the timeline? 6 weeks. I want to launch our new brand identity at the same time we're pitching Southwestern Insurance's strategic overhaul. David's eyes lit up. We're going to rebrand ourselves while we're rebranding our biggest client? We're going to demonstrate that we practice what we preach. My afternoon was filled with client calls and operational meetings, the kind of routine business management that felt comfortable and familiar despite the new environment. I spoke with 3 existing clients about upcoming projects, reviewed budget allocations with Linda, and participated in a conference call with potential acquisition targets in Colorado. At 4 o'clock, Margaret Wells arrived for our scheduled strategic planning session. Margaret was wearing her board chair authority comfortably, clearly pleased with how the first week of transition had proceeded. "How are you settling into the role?" she asked as we settled in the conference room. "Well, I think the team is talented and the operational challenges are manageable. The bigger question is whether we can transform the company culture quickly enough to retain our key clients." "What's your assessment of that timeline?" I pulled out the analysis I'd been preparing throughout the week, a detailed evaluation of client retention risks, competitive threats, and growth opportunities. Southwestern Insurance and Desert Tech are immediate priorities. If we lose either account, the financial impact sets us back 12 to 18 months. But if we can successfully upgrade our service delivery for those clients, they become proof points for expanding similar relationships. Margaret reviewed my analysis, asking pointed questions about resource allocation, staff development needs, and competitive positioning. She was clearly experienced in guiding companies through strategic transitions. "What about Jessica?" she asked finally. "What about her? How is the family dynamic affecting your leadership decisions?" It was a fair question that deserved an honest answer. Jessica is a valuable employee who's been underutilized by previous leadership. Her marketing expertise and client relationships are assets I want to leverage. The fact that she's my sister is irrelevant to those business considerations. And personally, we're rebuilding trust that was damaged by some recent family conflicts, but we're both committed to maintaining professional boundaries while we work through personal issues. Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the approach I hoped you'd take. Personal relationships can enhance business partnerships when they're managed properly." We spent the rest of our meeting developing a 6-month strategic plan that included client retention initiatives, staff development programs, and preliminary planning for the digital strategy firm acquisition I'd mentioned to Tom. By 6 o'clock, most of the staff had left for the day, but I could see Jessica still at her desk, working on what appeared to be a client presentation. I knocked on her cubicle wall, and she looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely welcoming. "Working late?" "Preparing for tomorrow's pitch to Apex Financial. We're competing against 2 other firms for their annual marketing contract." "How confident are you about winning?" Jessica's expression grew more serious. "Honestly, not very. Our creative work is solid but not spectacular, and our pricing is probably higher than the competition." "What would it take to win?" "A creative approach that demonstrates we understand their business challenges better than they do, and a strategic vision that makes their current marketing efforts look outdated." "Can you deliver that?" "With the right support and creative freedom? Yes." I sat down in the empty chair beside her desk. "What kind of support do you need?" "Permission to propose something genuinely innovative rather than playing it safe. Budget flexibility to include services that aren't part of our standard offering. And backing from leadership if the client pushes back on unconventional recommendations." "You have all of that." Jessica looked surprised. "Really?" "Really. Put together the presentation you think will win the account, regardless of whether it fits our traditional service model." If we win Apex Financial with breakthrough thinking, that becomes our new standard approach. And if we lose, then we learn something valuable about what doesn't work, and we apply that knowledge to the next opportunity. Jessica was quiet, for a moment, clearly processing this unexpected level of creative and strategic freedom. "There's something else," she said finally. "The team knows about our family relationship, and they're watching to see whether that affects how you treat me professionally." "How do you want me to handle that?" "The same way you'd handle any other valuable employee. Give me opportunities to succeed. Hold me accountable for results, and don't let personal considerations override business judgment." It was a mature and practical approach, exactly what I would have hoped for from someone navigating the complexities of being both family and employee. "That's exactly what I intend to do." Jessica smiled, and for the first time since becoming her boss, it felt like we were both comfortable with our new professional dynamic. "Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself in this new role." "You don't need to prove yourself, Jessica. You just need to do the work you're capable of doing." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. The crisis that had seemed so devastating on Saturday night had evolved into an opportunity for both professional growth and personal healing. Jessica and I still had work to do on rebuilding our sister relationship, but our professional partnership was developing into something stronger than I had expected. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "How was your day at the office? CEO?" I smiled and texted back, "Productive. I'm really enjoying the work." Her response came quickly. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." For the first time in years, I believed that was unconditionally true. Part 4. 3 weeks into my tenure as CEO, Morrison & Associates was beginning to feel like a genuinely different company. The transformation wasn't just about new leadership or strategic direction. It was about the gradual shift in how staff members approached their work, their clients, and their creative possibilities. Jessica's presentation to Apex Financial had been a revelation. Instead of proposing conventional marketing services, she'd developed a comprehensive brand evolution strategy that positioned Apex as a financial technology innovator rather than a traditional bank. The presentation included interactive digital components, social media campaigns that challenged industry assumptions, and a complete reimagining of how financial services could engage with younger consumers. Apex's leadership had been so impressed that they'd not only awarded Morrison the annual contract, but had also requested an expanded scope of work that included website redesign, employee training, and strategic consultation on digital transformation initiatives. The contract value was 40% higher than our original proposal, and the project timeline extended 18 months instead of the typical 12-month marketing cycle. "I've never presented anything that ambitious before," Jessica told me during our weekly one-on-one meeting. "Previous leadership would have wanted to see 3 safe alternatives alongside any innovative recommendations. How did it feel to present your best thinking without hedging?" Terrifying and exhilarating, but also right, if that makes sense. Like I was finally doing the work I'd always wanted to do. Jessica's success with Apex had ripple effects throughout the company. Other account managers began proposing more ambitious strategies for their clients. The creative team started developing concepts that prioritized impact over safety. Even administrative staff members began suggesting operational improvements that challenged existing processes. Tom Bradley had leveraged Jessica's Apex success to propose a similarly transformative approach for Southwestern Insurance. Instead of simply renewing their existing marketing contract, he'd convinced them to participate in a complete market positioning analysis that would inform a 12-month brand evolution campaign. Southwestern's executives are excited about the possibility of differentiating themselves from larger competitors, Tom explained during our Thursday morning leadership meeting. They've been operating defensively for years, responding to market changes rather than anticipating them. The Southwestern project would be Morrison's largest undertaking since I'd become CEO, requiring collaboration between account management, creative services, and digital strategy teams. It was exactly the kind of integrated campaign that would demonstrate our evolving capabilities while generating significant revenue. "What do you need to ensure success?" I asked Tom. "Additional creative talent for the brand development phase, expanded research capabilities for the market analysis, and probably some specialized digital expertise for the implementation." "The digital expertise is coming. I'm finalizing the acquisition of a Phoenix-based digital strategy firm called Velocity Partners. That acquisition should close within 6 weeks, and their team includes specialists in data analytics, user experience design, and marketing automation." The Velocity Partners acquisition was the next major step in building Meridian Holdings into a comprehensive marketing platform. Velocity's founder, Maria Santos, had built a successful consultancy focused on helping traditional businesses develop digital-first marketing strategies. Her team of 12 specialists would complement Morrison's traditional marketing expertise, while expanding our service capabilities significantly. "When the acquisition closes, we'll have nearly 50 employees across 2 companies," I continued. "That gives us the scale and specialization to compete for larger clients while maintaining the agility and personal attention that smaller clients value." Linda Hayes raised her hand from across the conference table. "What's the plan for integrating the 2 companies operationally?" "Initially, they'll operate as separate entities under the Meridian Holdings umbrella. Velocity's clients will continue working with their existing teams, and Morrison's clients will continue working with our teams. But we'll cross-train staff and develop integrated service offerings that leverage both companies' expertise." "What about office space?" asked David Chen, the creative director. "Velocity will relocate to this building. There's available space on the 12th floor that will accommodate their team while keeping them close enough for regular collaboration." The leadership meeting continued for another hour, covering client development priorities, staffing needs, and operational improvements. The energy in the room was noticeably different from my first week as CEO. Instead of defensive discussions about managing decline, we were having proactive conversations about growth strategy and competitive advantages. After the meeting, Jessica lingered in the conference room, clearly wanting to discuss something privately. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "More than okay, but I wanted to talk to you about something that happened yesterday." Jessica's expression was serious but not worried, suggesting good news delivered with appropriate gravity. "David Morrison called me yesterday afternoon. The founder, Robert Morrison, who retired 5 years ago. This was unexpected. Robert Morrison had built the company from scratch, selling it to a larger firm when he was ready to retire. He'd had no involvement with Morrison and Associates since the sale, and his decision to reach out to Jessica directly was unusual." "What did he want?" "He'd heard about the ownership change and the new leadership. Apparently, he's been following the company's performance since he sold it, and he was concerned about the direction things were heading under the previous management." "And now?" "Now he's intrigued. He said he'd heard positive things about the changes you've implemented and the results we're achieving with clients like Apex Financial." Jessica paused, clearly building towards something significant. "He wants to meet with you. He said he has some thoughts about strategic opportunities that might interest the new ownership." Robert Morrison's interest was flattering, but I was curious about his motivations. Former business owners who remained engaged with their sold companies usually had specific reasons for re-establishing contact. "Did he give you any indication of what those opportunities might involve?" "Not specifically, but he mentioned that he's been consulting with several companies since retirement, and he's identified some potential synergies that might benefit Morrison and Associates under new leadership." "Set up the meeting. I'd like to hear what he has in mind." Jessica made a note on her phone. "There's something else. David Morrison asked specifically about you. Not just your qualifications or business background, but your approach to leadership and your vision for the company." "What did you tell him?" I told him that you're the most strategically minded person I've ever worked with, that you see opportunities where other people see problems, and that you've already transformed this company in ways that previous leadership couldn't have imagined. Jessica's assessment was generous, but it also reflected how dramatically our professional relationship had evolved over the past month. The sister who had dismissed my ambitions at family dinner was now serving as my advocate with industry contacts. Thank you for representing me well. It wasn't difficult. I was just being honest about what I've observed. Our conversation was interrupted by Rebecca, my assistant, who knocked on the conference room door with a slightly flustered expression. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation that needs your attention. What kind of situation? Channel 7. News is here. They want to interview you about the Morrison & Associates acquisition and your background as a young female CEO in the Phoenix business community. I looked at Jessica, who seemed as surprised as I was. Neither of us had anticipated media attention, and we certainly hadn't prepared for impromptu television interviews. Did they say how they learned about the acquisition? Apparently, the Phoenix Business Journal is running a story tomorrow about recent mergers and acquisitions in the local marketing industry. Morrison & Associates is featured prominently, and they mentioned you as an example of emerging leadership in the business community. This was the kind of visibility that could be extremely valuable for business development, but it also meant that my family's assumptions about my career would become very public very quickly. My parents' friends would see the news coverage. Jessica's former colleagues from other companies would learn about our professional relationship. The anonymity that had protected my dual identity was about to disappear completely. Where's the news crew? In the lobby. I told them you were in a meeting and asked if they could wait 15 minutes. I needed to make a decision quickly. Television interviews were opportunities to establish thought leadership and build company visibility. But they also required careful preparation to avoid saying something that could be taken out of context or misunderstood. Jessica, are you comfortable with the possibility that this interview will make our family situation public knowledge? You mean the fact that I work for my sister? Among other things. Jessica considered this for a moment. Honestly, I think it makes both of us look good. You for building a successful business and acquiring the company where I work. Me for earning my position based on qualifications rather than family connections. She was right. Our story, properly told, was about professional competence and family support rather than nepotism or favoritism. Rebecca, tell the news crew I'll be available in 10 minutes. Jessica, do you want to participate in the interview? Only if you think it would be helpful. This is your story. It's our story, and I think it would be valuable for viewers to hear about our professional relationship from both perspectives. I spent the next 10 minutes quickly reviewing key talking points about the acquisition, Morrison's strategic direction, and the broader trends in the Phoenix marketing industry. Jessica and I also discussed how to address questions about family business dynamics and whether our personal relationship created advantages or challenges in the workplace. The Channel 7 reporter was a woman in her 30s named Amanda Torres, who specialized in business and economic news. She'd done her homework, asking informed questions about market consolidation, growth strategies, and the challenges facing small marketing firms in a competitive industry. What's unusual about this acquisition, Amanda said as cameras rolled, is that you're not just a young CEO, but you built the company that purchased Morrison & Associates while working at a coffee shop. Can you tell us about that journey? I started Meridian Digital Holdings 3 years ago as a way to help small businesses develop more effective marketing strategies. I worked at Corner Grind Café because I enjoyed the customer service experience and because it provided flexible scheduling while I built my consulting practice. So the coffee shop job was always part of a larger business plan? It was part of maintaining a simple lifestyle while I focused on growing the business. I didn't want to change my day-to-day routine until I had built something substantial and sustainable. Amanda turned to Jessica. What was it like to discover that your sister was acquiring the company where you work? Jessica smiled. Surprising, obviously, but also exciting. Sarah has always been strategically minded and ambitious. Learning about the scope of what she'd built was impressive, but it wasn't completely out of character. Does working for your sister create any complications in your professional relationship? Not complications, but it does require clear boundaries and consistent professionalism. Sarah evaluates my work based on the same standards she applies to every other employee. If anything, I probably work harder to ensure that my family connection doesn't create any perception of favoritism. The interview continued for 15 minutes, covering growth plans, industry trends, and the challenges of leading a company through significant change. Both Jessica and I felt confident about our responses, and Amanda seemed pleased with the content for her story. When will this air? I asked as the camera crew packed up their equipment. Tonight at 6 and 11, with an abbreviated version, running tomorrow morning. The Phoenix Business Journal story should be online by 5 this afternoon. After the news crew left, Jessica and I returned to my office to discuss the potential implications of public visibility. Neither of us anticipated negative consequences, but media attention would definitely change how we were perceived within the local business community. Are you ready for everyone to know? Jessica asked. About the business? About everything. The coffee shop, the secret empire, the family dynamics, all of it. I considered her question seriously. For 3 years, I'd carefully managed information about my professional activities, controlling who knew what and when they learned it. Public media coverage meant surrendering that control completely. I think so. Hiding was useful while I was building the business, but now transparency is probably more valuable than privacy. What about mom and dad? What about them? They're going to see you on television talking about building a multi-million-dollar company while they thought you were serving coffee. That's going to be a lot for them to process. Jessica was right. My parents had accepted my explanation about the business, but seeing their daughter positioned as a successful CEO on the evening news would make the transformation feel more real and more dramatic. I should probably call them before the story airs. Probably. I called my mother at 4:30, just before the Phoenix Business Journal story went online. Mom, I wanted to give you a heads up about something. Channel 7 News interviewed me this afternoon about the company acquisition. The story is going to air on tonight's news. Television news? About your business? About Morrison & Associates and the trends in Phoenix's marketing industry. I'm being positioned as an example of young entrepreneurship and business growth. There was a long pause. Our Sarah is going to be on television as a business expert? Your Sarah who happens to be a business owner, yes. I need to call your father and my sister, and probably the neighbors. I could hear the excitement in her voice, the transition from confusion to pride that had characterized her response to most of my recent revelations. Mom, the story is going to mention that Jessica works for Morrison & Associates. People are going to know about our professional relationship. Is that a problem? Not a problem, just a change. We've been keeping our family situation relatively private, but that's not possible anymore. I think it's wonderful that you're working together. It shows that successful families support each other professionally as well as personally. My mother's perspective was characteristically optimistic, but it also reflected a level of acceptance about our new dynamic that I found reassuring. The Phoenix Business Journal story went online at 5:15, featuring Morrison & Associates, prominently in an article about recent mergers and acquisitions in the local marketing industry. The piece positioned me as an example of innovative young leadership and included quotes from both Margaret Wells and Maria Santos about the strategic benefits of industry consolidation. By 6 o'clock, my phone was buzzing with text messages from colleagues, former classmates, and family friends who'd seen the article or heard about the television coverage. Most of the messages were congratulatory, expressing surprise but also support for my business success. Jessica and I watched the evening news together in my office, curious to see how Amanda Torres had edited our interview. The story was balanced and professional, focusing on business strategy and industry trends rather than sensationalizing the family relationship angle. "You came across really well," Jessica said as the segment ended. "Confident but not arrogant. Knowledgeable but accessible. You did too." The part about working harder to avoid perceptions of favoritism was perfect. As we prepared to leave the office, Jessica turned to me with an expression that suggested something important was on her mind. "Sarah, I want you to know that I'm genuinely proud to work for you. Not just because you're my sister, but because you're an exceptional leader who's building something impressive." "Thank you. That means a lot. I also want to apologize again for what I said at dinner 3 weeks ago, not just because I was wrong about the facts, but because I was wrong about who you are as a person." It was the most complete apology Jessica had offered, acknowledging not just her factual errors, but her fundamental misjudgment of my character and potential. Apology accepted. Good, because I'm looking forward to seeing what we can build together. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in less than a month. The crisis that had seemed so devastating at my parents' dinner table had evolved into an opportunity for professional growth, family healing, and personal authenticity that exceeded anything I could have planned or predicted. Tomorrow, I would meet with Robert Morrison to discuss his strategic opportunities. Next week, the Velocity Partners acquisition would close, officially launching the next phase of Meridian Holdings' growth. And throughout it all, I would be working alongside Jessica to build Morrison & Associates into the marketing firm we both knew it could become. For the first time in years, I was looking forward to family dinner on Sunday. Part 5. The meeting with Robert Morrison took place the following Tuesday afternoon in his home office, a converted study in his North Scottsdale house that overlooked the desert landscape he'd grown to love during his retirement. Morrison was a man in his early 70s with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested decades of successful business leadership. "I'll be direct about why I wanted to meet," he said after we'd settled into leather chairs beside floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've been watching Morrison & Associates struggle under the previous ownership, and I was concerned that the company I spent 15 years building was going to fail." Morrison poured coffee from a French press, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who'd learned to appreciate simple rituals. When I heard about the acquisition and the new leadership, I was cautiously hopeful. When I started hearing about the results you've achieved in just a few weeks, I became genuinely excited. "What results are you referring to?" "The apex. Financial contract, for starters. That's exactly the kind of breakthrough thinking the company used to be known for." The approach Jessica presented challenged assumptions about financial services marketing in ways that remind me of our best work from the early days. Morrison had clearly been paying closer attention to his former company's performance than I'd realized. His knowledge of specific client projects suggested ongoing relationships within the local business community that kept him informed about industry developments. "I also heard about your plans to acquire Velocity Partners and integrate their digital expertise with Morrison's traditional marketing capabilities. That's smart strategic thinking that addresses real market needs." "Thank you, but I suspect you didn't ask to meet just to offer congratulations." Morrison smiled. "You're right. I have a proposal that might interest you." He reached for a folder on the coffee table between us, pulling out what appeared to be a business plan or strategic analysis. "I've been consulting with companies since retirement, helping business owners plan exit strategies and identify acquisition opportunities. Through that work, I've encountered several marketing firms throughout Arizona and New Mexico that are facing the same challenges Morrison & Associates experienced under previous ownership." Morrison spread out organizational charts and financial Summaries for 5 different companies ranging from small creative boutiques to mid-sized full-service agencies. These firms have good client relationships and talented staff, but they lack the strategic direction and operational efficiency needed to compete in today's market. They're all potential acquisition targets for a company with the resources and vision to integrate them effectively. I studied the documents, recognizing several company names from industry publications and competitive analyses I'd reviewed while planning Meridian Holdings' expansion strategy. What's your proposal? I want to partner with you to acquire and integrate these companies. I bring industry knowledge, established relationships, and deal-making experience. You bring capital, strategic vision, and operational expertise. It was an intriguing proposition that could accelerate Meridian Holdings' growth significantly. Instead of acquiring companies one at a time through lengthy negotiation processes, I could leverage Morrison's relationships and reputation to structure multiple deals simultaneously. What kind of partnership structure are you envisioning? I become a senior advisor to Meridian Holdings with equity participation in the holding company. I help identify, evaluate, and negotiate acquisitions, and I provide strategic guidance as you integrate the companies into your platform. Morrison's proposal was ambitious, but realistic. His industry knowledge and relationships would be valuable. Assets and his experience managing company integrations could help avoid the operational challenges that often derailed acquisition strategies. What's your timeline for these acquisitions? 18 months for all 5 companies, assuming adequate financing and successful negotiations. The owners are all approaching retirement age or considering exit strategies, so the timing is favorable for acquisition discussions. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing detailed analyses of each target company, discussing integration challenges, and exploring financing structures for multiple simultaneous acquisitions. Morrison's preparation was thorough, and his strategic side thinking was sophisticated, suggesting that our potential partnership could be mutually beneficial. I need to discuss this with my board and my financial advisors, I told him as our meeting concluded. But I'm genuinely interested in exploring the partnership. Take all the time you need. These opportunities aren't going anywhere immediately, but they won't wait indefinitely either. As I drove back to the office, I considered the implications of Morrison's proposal. Partnering with him could transform Meridian Holdings from a small acquisition platform into a major player in the regional marketing industry. Within 2 years, we could have offices in multiple cities and service capabilities that rivaled much larger national firms. The expansion would also create significant opportunities for existing staff, including Jessica, who could potentially advance to regional leadership roles as the company grew. Her success with clients like Apex Financial demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that would be valuable at a larger scale. When I arrived at the office, I found Jessica waiting in my assistant's area with an expression that suggested important news. "We need to talk," she said. "Something significant just happened." We went into my office and Jessica closed the door behind us, which she'd never done before. Whatever news she had was clearly sensitive. "I just got off the phone with Linda Hayes," Jessica began. "Desert Tech Solutions called this morning. They're not just renewing their contract with us. They want to expand it significantly." Desert Tech Solutions had been one of our most challenging client relationships, a technology company with demanding expectations and a history of switching marketing firms every 18 months. Their decision to expand rather than terminate their contract represented a validation of everything we'd been working to achieve. "What kind of expansion are they talking about?" I asked Jessica as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "Complete digital transformation consulting. They want us to redesign their entire customer acquisition strategy, overhaul their brand messaging, and implement marketing automation systems across all their sales channels." Jessica pulled out her notes from the morning's phone call, clearly excited about the opportunity but also somewhat overwhelmed by its scope. "The project timeline is 12 months. and the budget is 3 times larger than their current annual contract. But Sarah, they specifically requested that I lead the project team. This was significant recognition for Jessica's capabilities, especially considering that Desert Tech's leadership team included several executives who were notoriously difficult to please. Their confidence in her strategic thinking represented a major professional milestone. "What's your assessment of the project requirements?" I asked. Challenging, but absolutely doable, especially once the Velocity Partners acquisition closes and we have access to their digital expertise. The integration between traditional marketing strategy and advanced digital implementation is exactly what we've been positioning ourselves to deliver. Jessica's enthusiasm was infectious, but I could also see the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Leading a project of this magnitude would require coordination across multiple teams, management of complex client expectations, and delivery of measurable results that could determine Morrison & Associates' reputation in the marketplace. What support do you need to ensure success? Direct access to the Velocity team once they're integrated, budget authority to bring in specialized contractors if needed, and backing from leadership if we need to push back on unrealistic client demands. You have all of that. Jessica looked relieved, but also determined. There's something else. Desert Tech's CEO mentioned that they chose to expand their relationship with us specifically because of the leadership changes and strategic direction they've observed over the past month. They're responding to the cultural transformation as much as the service improvements. Exactly. Which means this project becomes a case study for everything we're trying to build. If we succeed with Desert Tech, it demonstrates our capabilities to every potential client in the Phoenix market. The conversation was interrupted by Rebecca, who knocked on the door with news that Margaret Wells had arrived for an unscheduled meeting. Margaret's impromptu visits usually meant either excellent news or significant challenges, and her expression as she entered my office suggested the former. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything critical," Margaret said, though her demeanor indicated she had news that justified the interruption. "Not at all. Jessica was just updating me on Desert Tech's contract expansion." "Perfect timing, then. What I have to share relates directly to that kind of client success." Margaret took the seat beside Jessica, creating an informal triangle. That felt more like a strategy session than a formal meeting. "I've been fielding calls all morning from other marketing firms in Phoenix. Apparently, word is getting out about Morrison & Associates' transformation, and several companies are interested in exploring partnership or acquisition opportunities." This was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. The marketing industry in Phoenix was relatively small, and significant changes at established firms like Morrison & Associates would generate attention from competitors and potential collaborators. "What kind of partnerships are they proposing?" Jessica asked. "Everything from project collaboration to full acquisition discussions. 2 firms want to explore joint venture opportunities for larger client projects. One smaller company is interested in being acquired to gain access to our client base and service capabilities." Margaret pulled out her phone and showed us a list of companies that had reached out, along with brief notes about their stated interests and capabilities. The most intriguing inquiry came from Stratton & Associates in Tucson. They're a well-established firm with strong client relationships throughout southern Arizona, but they've been struggling with the same digital transformation challenges that we've been addressing. Stratton & Associates was a name I recognized from industry publications, a company with a solid reputation and annual revenue comparable to Morrison's pre-acquisition performance. A partnership with them could provide immediate access to new markets while leveraging our recently developed digital capabilities. "What are they proposing?" I asked. "Initially, collaborative projects where they handle traditional marketing strategy and we provide digital implementation. But their long-term interest is in a full merger that would create the largest marketing firm in Arizona." Jessica and I exchanged glances, both recognizing the magnitude of what Margaret was describing. A merger with Stratton would accelerate, our growth timeline significantly while providing geographic diversification and expanded service capabilities. Have you had any preliminary discussions about deal structure or integration timelines? I asked. Nothing formal yet. They're requesting a meeting to explore mutual interest and compatibility. But Sarah, this could be exactly the kind of expansion opportunity we've been discussing. The timing was remarkable. Just as I was considering Robert Morrison's proposal for multiple acquisitions throughout the Southwest, established firms were approaching us about partnerships and mergers. Instead of pursuing growth through acquisition alone, we could potentially expand through strategic alliances with companies that brought complementary strengths. Set up the meeting with Stratton, I told Margaret. I want to understand their vision for a potential merger and how it would align with our expansion plans. There's one more thing, Margaret continued. The Phoenix Business Journal wants to do a follow-up story about Morrison & Associates' growth and its impact on the local marketing industry. They're positioning you as an example of innovative leadership that's reshaping business practices in traditional industries. More media attention would increase our visibility with potential clients and partners, but it would also intensify scrutiny of our business practices and family dynamics. The success we'd achieved made us a more interesting story, but it also raised expectations for continued growth and performance. What's the timeline for the article? Jessica asked. They want to interview Sarah next week and publish the story in their next monthly business leadership feature. It would include photography and probably some discussion of the family business, dynamics that have generated so much local interest. I looked at Jessica to gauge her comfort level with continued public attention. Our professional relationship had become a talking point in Phoenix business circles, and additional media coverage would make us even more visible. I'm fine with it, Jessica said, apparently reading my thoughts. At this point, our story is about business success and family collaboration. That's a positive narrative that benefits both of us professionally. Margaret's visit concluded with scheduling for the Stratton meeting and preliminary planning for the Business Journal interview. After she left, Jessica and I spent another hour discussing the implications of our expanding opportunities and how to manage multiple growth initiatives simultaneously. 6 weeks ago, I was worried about keeping my job, Jessica said as we wrapped up our planning session. Now I'm leading major client projects and discussing regional expansion strategies. 6 weeks ago, I was hiding behind a coffee shop apron to avoid explaining my business ambitions. Now I'm being interviewed by business reporters and considering merger opportunities. Do you think we would have gotten here without what happened at family dinner that night? It was an interesting question that I'd been pondering myself. Jessica's cruel assessment of my career choices had certainly accelerated my timeline for revealing the truth about my business success. But would we have eventually reached the same point through normal family communication? Maybe eventually, but not this quickly and not with the same level of mutual respect. The crisis forced us both to be completely honest about our assumptions and expectations. And it made me realize how much I'd been underestimating you. Not just professionally, but as a person. The acknowledgement was meaningful, representing a level of self-reflection that suggested genuine growth rather than just polite apologies. What I said that night was about my own insecurities, not about your actual capabilities or potential. I was projecting my fears about professional success onto my assessment of your choices. What fears? Fear that I wasn't as successful as I appeared to be. Fear that my career advancement was more about persistence than genuine talent. Fear that people were comparing us and finding me wanting in ways I couldn't see. Jessica's honesty was surprising and illuminating. Her harsh judgment of my career path had been driven by anxiety about her own professional standing, rather than concern about my welfare or the family's reputation. So, when you saw me apparently struggling, professionally, it reinforced your confidence in your own success. Something like that, which is awful to admit, but probably true. And when you learned that I was actually more successful than you'd realized, it threatened that confidence? Initially, yes, but now it's actually reassuring. Having a sister who's genuinely accomplished makes me feel like success runs in our family rather than being something I have to achieve in isolation. Our conversation was interrupted by Tom Bradley, who knocked on my office door with an expression that suggested urgent news. Tom rarely sought unscheduled meetings, so his presence indicated something that required immediate attention. "Sorry to interrupt, but we just received a request for proposal from Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. They're looking for a marketing partner to handle their business development and tourism promotion initiatives." Sky Harbor was one of the largest potential clients in the Phoenix market, with an annual marketing budget that exceeded the total revenue of most regional firms. A successful proposal could transform Morrison & Associates from a mid-sized agency into a major player in the Southwest marketing industry. "What's the timeline for the proposal?" I asked. 6 weeks from initial submission to final presentation. They're considering 4 firms total, including 2 national agencies that specialize in transportation marketing. Jessica immediately understood the implications. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that demonstrates whether our transformation is real or just temporary improvement. "What would it take to win?" I asked Tom. "A proposal that demonstrates deep understanding of airport operations, tourism marketing, and business development strategies. We'd need to show capability in digital marketing, traditional advertising, public relations, and probably some specialized services like event management and corporate communications. The Sky Harbor opportunity would require every capability we'd been developing, plus several service areas where we'd need to partner with specialists or subcontractors. It was ambitious but achievable, especially if we could leverage the Velocity Partners acquisition and potentially collaborate with other firms like Stratton and Associates. Put together a project team that includes Jessica, David Chen, and representatives from Velocity once the acquisition closes. I want us to submit a proposal that sets a new standard for comprehensive marketing strategy." Tom looked energized by the challenge. "This could be the project that establishes Morrison & Associates as the premier marketing firm in Arizona, or the project that reveals we're not ready for that level of responsibility yet," Jessica added pragmatically. "Only one way to find out," I said. The Sky Harbor proposal became the organizing principle for everything we did over the following month. The project team met daily to develop strategy frameworks, research airport industry trends, and design service delivery models that would differentiate us from larger, more established competitors. Jessica emerged as the natural leader for proposal development, coordinating between creative services, account management, and the newly integrated Velocity Partners team. Her ability to synthesize complex information and translate strategic concepts into clear, compelling presentations was exactly what the project required. The Velocity Partners acquisition closed on schedule, bringing 12 talented digital specialists into the Morrison & Associates family. Maria Santos, Velocity's founder, became our chief digital officer, reporting directly to me while maintaining autonomy over her team's specialized projects. The integration proceeded smoothly, with Velocity's team collaborating immediately on existing client projects like Desert Tech's digital transformation and contributing specialized expertise to the Sky Harbor proposal. The cultural fit was better than I'd anticipated, with both teams sharing commitments to innovative thinking and client service excellence. Robert Morrison's partnership proposal received approval from Margaret Wells and the board, leading to preliminary discussions about acquiring 2 of the 5 firms he'd identified. The expansion timeline was accelerated to take advantage of favorable market conditions and available financing opportunities. 3 weeks before the Sky Harbor presentation deadline, I received a call that would change everything once again. David Morrison was calling with news about an opportunity that exceeded even our most ambitious expansion plans. "Sarah, I've been approached by a national marketing firm that's looking to establish a Southwest regional presence. They're interested in acquiring Meridian Holdings as their platform for expansion into Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada." The acquiring company was Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, a firm with offices in 12 major cities and annual revenue approaching $50 million. Their acquisition offer would provide immediate access to national client opportunities while maintaining local autonomy for strategic decision-making. "What kind of acquisition structure are they proposing?" I asked. "Complete acquisition of Meridian Holdings, with retention of existing management and expansion funding for aggressive regional growth. You would become regional director for the Southwest, with responsibility for operations across 3 states." The opportunity was staggering in its scope and implications. Instead of building Meridian Holdings gradually through local acquisitions, I could leverage Pinnacle's resources and client relationships to create a major regional presence within 2 years. "What's the timeline for their decision?" "They want to meet with you next week. If preliminary discussions go well, they're prepared to make a formal offer within 30 days. I spent the evening discussing the Pinnacle opportunity with Jessica, my parents, and Margaret Wells. Everyone agreed that the offer represented validation of everything we'd built while providing opportunities for growth that would take years to achieve independently. "What happens to Morrison & Associates staff if you accept the acquisition?" Jessica asked. "Everyone keeps their jobs, with expanded opportunities for advancement as we grow throughout the region. You could potentially become marketing director for multiple offices instead of just Phoenix operations. And personally, what happens to our working relationship? We continue working together, but in a much larger organization with more complex challenges and opportunities." The Sky Harbor presentation took place on a Thursday morning in early May, exactly 2 months after I'd been introduced as CEO of Morrison & Associates. Our proposal team presented a comprehensive marketing strategy that integrated traditional advertising, digital marketing, tourism promotion, and business development services into a cohesive 12-month campaign. Jessica delivered the strategic overview with confidence and expertise that impressed even our most skeptical audience members. The creative concepts developed by David Chen's team demonstrated innovative thinking that challenged conventional approaches to airport marketing. The digital implementation framework provided by Maria Santos's team showed sophisticated understanding of data analytics and customer engagement technologies. Sky Harbor's decision committee asked pointed questions about our capacity to deliver complex services, our experience with large-scale campaigns, and our ability to coordinate multiple service providers effectively. Our responses demonstrated both realistic assessment of challenges and confident commitment to exceptional results. We were notified 2 weeks later that Morrison & Associates had been selected as Sky Harbor's marketing partner, with a contract value exceeding $2 million over 18 months. The victory represented validation of our transformation and positioned us for continued growth throughout the regional market. The Pinnacle marketing acquisition closed in September, creating opportunities for expansion that exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 1 year, Meridian Holdings had offices in Phoenix, Tucson, Albuquerque, and Las Vegas, with total staff approaching 150 people. Jessica was promoted to Regional Marketing Director, overseeing client relationships and strategic development across all 4 offices. Her leadership capabilities and strategic thinking had evolved dramatically from the insecure executive who'd questioned her own success just 18 months earlier. Our family dinners resumed their regular schedule, but with a completely different dynamic. Instead of Jessica feeling threatened by comparisons to me, we collaborated on business challenges and celebrated each other's professional achievements. Our parents had become genuinely proud advocates for both daughters, often sharing stories about our business success with friends and neighbors. The transformation that began with a cruel assessment of my career choices had evolved into a partnership that exceeded both our individual capabilities and our combined potential. Jessica had become the executive she'd always been capable of being, while I'd learned to lead with transparency rather than secrecy. Looking back, I realized that the crisis at family dinner had been necessary for both of us. Jessica needed to confront her own insecurities and assumptions about success, while I needed to stop hiding my accomplishments behind false modesty and defensive privacy. The coffee shop where I'd maintained my cover for 3 years eventually became a client of our expanded firm, with Corner Grind Café hiring us to develop a regional expansion strategy. Marcus, the owner, laughed when he learned about my business background but wasn't entirely surprised. "I always knew you were overqualified for coffee service," he told me during our first official business meeting. "I just figured you were working through some personal transition or career change." I was working through a transition, just not the kind anyone expected. Today, Meridian Holdings continues growing throughout the Southwest, with Jessica and me working together to build something larger and more impactful than either of us could have created alone. The sister who once dismissed my potential has become my most trusted collaborator and advocate. Sometimes the biggest transformations begin with the most painful truths. Sometimes family crises become opportunities for growth that neither person could have achieved independently. And sometimes the people who underestimate you the most dramatically become your strongest supporters once they understand who you really are. The woman serving coffee was always the same person as the CEO acquiring companies. The difference was simply in other people's willingness to look beyond their assumptions and see the complete picture. Jessica learned to see me clearly. I learned to let myself be seen. And together, we built something extraordinary. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.